I accidentally read 11 books in 3 weeks. Oops. I don't know if I should be concerned or impressed with myself, but regardless, we're going to do a quick review over Cradle by Will WIght, which is the series I just finished. The first book is Unsouled, and the most recent book to be released is Dreadgod, which I just finished. So yeah, quick review, and then next video I'm going to do a quick breakdown of things newer writers such as myself can learn from Will WIght. We'll go ahead and start with a brief description of what the story is about, just so we're all on the same page here. Cradle by Will WIght follows our main character Weishi Linden, who grew up in the Wei clan of Sacred Valley. The Wei clan places a very heavy emphasis within their culture on honor and strength. People there can train with their Madra, which is sort of like the magic of this world. They train and harness it and become essentially magic martial artists. And our main character Linden has little to no Madra to speak of. He is basically the only person without magic in a world full of magic. And to make matters worse, this society places so much emphasis on the strength that comes from this magic. He is literally at the very bottom rung of the figurative social ladder that exists in this world. So Linden's whole thing is he's determined to advance, to progress, to climb this figurative ladder by any means necessary. And so the story of Cradle follows him advancing and leveling up by any means necessary, whether that's good luck, hard work, persistence, creativity, any of the above. He's gonna find a way to get where he wants to be, to put it simply. It's kind of the very, very basic gist of it. Can't give away too much more without getting into spoilers of the first book, and I'm going to keep this whole video spoiler free. The novel is a progression fantasy novel, which is a pretty new subgenre of fantasy. Kind of comes from the lit RPG, Xianxia, sorry if I mispronounced that. It comes from that sort of area where emphasis on characters leveling up in terms of combat and, advancing, becoming more powerful. First we'll do the good, then we'll do a brief section on the bad because there's not that much bad to speak of. So as far as the good stuff goes, there's a lot of good in this. I think the biggest thing for me was just how fun and easy this series is to read. Like I said, I read it in 3 weeks. I was basically addicted to it. Pretty much any free time I had, I would pull out my phone and continue reading, and that's a very good sign for a novel to have. I haven't read a series like that since I read Wheel of Time. That's the last time I've been so invested in just reading every spare second I had. So it was a pleasing feeling to find a series where I could really just trust the author to do what he's gonna do. He's gonna do it well, and I could just get into it and read the story. I've heard this sort of style of novel compared to like the junk food of fantasy, and I get where the sentiment comes from, and I agree with it to an extent, even if it does kind of put some negative connotations that shouldn't be there. What I'm trying to say is this novel is not crazy complicated. It's not gonna have these super complex, deep themes that are gonna change your life. That's not really what this novel sets out to achieve. This novel is just fun to read. For me, that's the easiest way to put it, is that it's just simply fun and enjoyable to read. It's easy to read. There's no ridiculously complex sentences. If we use the metaphor of prose being like a glass that we see through to see the story, this isn't some artistic stained glass. This is just a window, so you can look through and enjoy the story. In general, the prose is light, airy, easy to read. It's not complex, but it is straightforward and clear, which is, as far as I'm concerned, it's a win, because if that's what the author is setting out to do and they're achieving that, then hey, they've achieved what they set out to do. That's a good thing. We'll talk about the characters briefly. The characters are all well designed. They're all fun to read. They all feel real, with a brief caveat that I'll get to in the bad section. Like I said, the characters all feel real. They're all compelling and fun to read. They all have satisfying character arcs. Even if they aren't the most complex character arcs, they're still well done for what they are, so they're very enjoyable to read. In terms of world building, the novel has a fun world where it really just feels like anything is possible. Every time you think you've started to figure things out, you realize there's a whole another layer of things going on, and he also does a great job of foreshadowing. There's things that come up in books like 9, 10, 11 that are briefly mentioned and foreshadowed in the first couple of books. So when you get to those, it's just very satisfying to know that he has planned this far ahead, and it's this has been in store, been in the mind from the beginning. We'll move on to the bad now. There's not too much bad to mention. For some people, they won't enjoy the lack of description. Didn't bother me too much, but there is not that much description to go off of. If we again compare this to Wheel of Time, Wheel of Time's description is very meticulous and detailed. If a character enters the room wearing a red dress, we're going to know what material the red dress is made of, what the trim is, what kind of you know, how the person wears the dress, everything. But in Cradle, it's more like so-and-so was wearing a red dress, and that's all you get. For some people, like I said, this is going to be a great thing. For others, this could be a con. It's going to kind of come down to the person by person, but yeah, just be prepared for less description, more room for you to interpret it as you see fit. Beyond that, I mentioned this in the pros, but the character arcs can be a little straightforward at times. People who are more character focused than they are plot focused will occasionally be left wanting just for the straightforwardness of the characters. There's no hugely complex things to discover. People who read for romance, there's not very much romance in these. There's a very minor romance subplot, but it's like, it's so minor it's hardly even worth mentioning. It's like, well, I don't want to spoil, but it's very minor, so yeah, don't even worry about that. The last thing I think that's worth mentioning is, this is a very specific complaint, but around books 9 primarily and a little bit of book 10, one character who frequently talks using sword metaphors, and everything that she says comes from the lens of being a person who's lived with swords her whole life. For a brief while, I felt like she was kind of falling victim to flanderization. So for those who don't know, flanderization is when one of a character's traits kind of takes over their whole personality and becomes their sole defining feature. I felt like this happened to this character for a little while there. This did get resolved at book 10, it got better, and then book 11 I didn't notice it at all, but I thought it was worth mentioning just because it was kind of an interesting observation for me almost. It wasn't a huge big deal, but it was interesting to see that a convention that's usually praised as a good trait within writing, which is, you know, being able to project a character's voice by the way they speak. So in this instance, the character always is talking about getting to the point of things, or being on a thin edge, anything to do with the sword really. Normally this would be a good thing. It's like, okay, you're taking into account the character's background and using that to help craft the way they speak. But in this instance, it almost went too far, and the character started to feel a little bit like a meme. They didn't feel like a real person the way we often hope characters to feel. This did improve as the novel went on, and by book 11 it was gone, so I don't expect this to be an issue going forward. But I figured it'd be worth mentioning just because I barely noticed any negatives, and I was like, I need to find something to comment on. But yeah, that'll wrap up the negative section and kind of segue us back into our overall final review. So, I mean, this is a great series. What else can I say? I read 11 books in 3 weeks. And I'm usually not the fastest reader. I typically only read for maybe 30 minutes at night or something. So if I'm dropping every moment of free time to continue reading, that's clearly a good sign. You know, Will WIGHT's got something amazing going here. The Cradle series is awesome. He frequently puts it on sale, so for those of you who aren't well disposed as far as money goes, I got the first 9 books for free, which is ridiculous. It blows my mind every time I think about it. I of course purchased books 10 and 11 to help support the author, and I'll be purchasing books going forward. But yeah, keep an eye out for sales, especially when newer books are coming out. It's a great way to get into the series if you're kind of unsure about it. Try out a few books, see if you like it. And then moving forward, you can, help support the author. But yeah, it's a great series. There's a lot to learn from it if you're a writer like me. And in my next video, I'll be briefly getting into some of the things that we can look to learn from Will WIGHT. And I'll be referencing some clips from his live stream and stuff like that. But that'll pretty much wrap up today's video. If you guys have any comments, suggestions, feedback, anything, I'd love to hear it in the description. Let me know what you thought about Cradle. Yeah, that's about it. Have a good one.